Welcome back to Trauma Free Relationship. If you're new, welcome. If this is the first time you're joining us, I appreciate you tuning in. My name is Tom Philp, and I'm your host. I have been working with couples and individuals for years to help them break their painful patterns so that they can learn to communicate better, repair faster, and stay connected longer. I'm really excited about our episode today. This is a real sort of boots on the ground, real world kind of episode. So we're going to try to stay away from a lot of the theory and the philosophy of relationships and really talk ground level tactics. So the title of this episode is What to Say Instead of Getting Defensive. And what I see so often in couples that I work with is they really struggle to know what to do differently in situations when they begin to feel themselves or their partner starting to get defensive. And so what that does is there's some kind of trigger that then usually causes one or both partners to move into their protective response, which is normal and natural when we feel there's some kind of threat to the relationship or to our identity. It's only natural for us to then move in and protect ourselves into some kind of a protective instinct. As I always say, we are made for protection just as much as we are made for connection. So having a protective strategy is not wrong, but being able to have control over that to some degree is what allows you more flexibility in your relationships with your partner. And so we want to be able to figure out, okay, when we start to get triggered and we start to move into our protection, that's more likely going to cause escalation and more likely going to cause a cycle in the relationship. Now, a cycle is just usually a painful, predictive pattern that plays out that both partners contribute to regardless of the topic. And all couples fall and have different types of patterns that play out in their relationship. Even healthy couples can fall into patterns. And so the difference between, say, a healthy couple and a non-healthy couple is not that one has patterns and the others don't. And the difference is the amount of rigidity in that pattern. So healthy couples have patterns too, but the problem is, or rather the benefit they have is they don't last as long. They know how to quickly de-escalate. They know how to quickly repair, restore communication. And so their patterns might flare up and then be de-escalated, and they might get back into a place of connection within a matter of minutes or hours. Whereas couples that don't have that advantage, where the pattern has been prolonged and the cycle has sort of become very rigid, that pattern may play out over days or even weeks at a time. And so it really sets in and becomes rigid in the relationship and almost acts as a third person. One of our goals through our relationship cycle reset program is to help couples break those patterns so that they can have a rupture and a repair much more quickly within a matter of a few minutes or hours as opposed to many long days. And I think a lot of this starts with, what do we say when we feel ourselves starting to get defensive, or we see some kind of defensiveness in our partner that could actually lead to some kind of escalation? And so that's what we're going to focus on here today. Your partner might come to you and might bring up something. They want to talk about something important to the relationship or to them, but they do so in a way that might feel criticized. So right away, you might feel blamed or criticized or attacked for something. And when that happens, before you know it, you can almost feel that temperature rise in your body, and you start to feel yourself getting a little bit defensive. That wall kind of goes up. And so, as I said, this right here becomes the trigger, the moment where we want to learn to interrupt our cycles in real time and recognize them so that we can do something different than have that same cycle play out. And so the question becomes, what do we say in these moments instead of getting defensive if we feel blamed or attacked or accused of something? Either, we're feeling a threat to the relationship. Uh-oh, we're gonna do that thing again. Uh-oh, this is gonna lead to another argument, another fight, another cycle. I see this train coming, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. And I hear that a lot from one or both partners. It feels like once they try to sit down and talk about something important, or maybe even something that has a little bit of vulnerable emotion to it, it feels like this train is coming and they just can't stop it. And so in those moments, we really want to identify what can we say differently instead of getting defensive and that cycle playing out, its normal loop. What can we do differently? So instead of the defensiveness, the escalation, the same fight, which breaks down communication and connection, we're going to dive in and we're going to talk about what can we do differently. The first thing I want to hone in on, though, is the defensive habits that come up. Because oftentimes what will happen is one person, a partner, will come and want to talk to the other partner. And they might come in a very soft way, but the cycle has been so rigid that even though they try to approach it in a soft way, it still triggers their partner. And as soon as their partner gets triggered, then they become triggered themselves. So now we've got both partners, both individuals that are starting to feel triggered in the relationship. So even though you may not come in and meaning to be attacking, meaning to be blaming or criticizing, even the fact you come in and try to be slow and low, as we say, right? You drop your vocal tone a little bit. It's a softer tone. You're not coming in already all worked up because you've thought about this for hours or days, or you've held on to something so long that it kind of just explodes out, because that certainly is going to feel like an attack to your partner. Even if you come in slow and low, it can still be triggering to your partner because your partner's anticipating that cycle. And so what happens? What is it that you see that defensiveness looks like? So I want to just kind of point out three kind of defensive habits that actually can ruin these conversations, that actually kind of start us down the road of those painful cycles that so many couples get stuck in. One of the first one is explaining. So you come in and you might want to be talking to your partner, and what you sense and what you see from them is an immediate explanation. And what that means is that they're automatically feeling on the defensive. You can see it. You can probably hear it in their tone. You can probably see it in their eyes or in their facial expressions. Maybe when you come in and you say, hey, can I talk to you about something that happened yesterday that kind of hurt my feelings? You might get an eye roll or a sort of a sigh. Yeah, we could talk about that. And immediately, you can feel your whole body just stiffen, like, oh, I didn't want this to happen. I was trying so hard. And your partner immediately starts to anticipate, oh, okay, I'm going to be attacked. I'm going to be blamed. I'm going to be criticized. And so before you even hardly get something out, what you see in your partner is an explanation. And they're trying to justify why they did what they did. That's not what I meant. Well, I meant it differently. Well, you don't understand. And what happens is the more you try to explain, the more your partner feels unheard. And so if you're showing up and immediately you feel yourself get defensive and you start trying to explain why you did what you did, and of course you're probably feeling a little bit attacked, I get that, but if you start explaining that, you're immediately going to start falling into that feedback loop because your partner's not going to feel heard or understood. So that's one of those defensive maneuvers that can really derail those conversations. Another one is turning it back on your partner. So instead of being able to sit and listen or absorb or even be curious about why your partner feels the way they do, you immediately start sort of reverse attacking, if you will. Well, this completely feels unfair. What about the time you did that? Well, no, that's not what I meant. See, here you go again. You're making mountains out of molehills. So notice what I did there. I turned that around so that it's not so much now my partner's concern, but I've shifted it and put the emphasis on me about my concern. And so oftentimes that reverse attack can very much derail those conversations. And it's another sort of defensive maneuver or habit, if you will, that can really derail these conversations. So when that happens, if we're shifting it back or turning it around on our partner, what we're doing then basically is completely eliminating any ability for us to be able to hear our partner out, for us to be able to attune to our partner, or even just be curious about why our partner feels this way. And so what we do is we reverse attack. Well, what about you? Will you do this? And so that's a surefire way for these conversations to go off the rails. And I think the third one I see the most with couples is where they tend to minimize the concern. It's not that big of a deal. Oh, you took it the wrong way. Oh, I was just joking. It was just a joke. Well, our partner might not have felt like it was a joke. It might have been something that was at their expense. It might have felt like it hurt their feelings, and they just want you to be able to hear that. So if you see this in your partner where they try to minimize your concern, this is probably another real big one that I see often in my couples that I work with, where this will derail the conversation, because essentially what happens is they are minimizing the concern and, again, communicating to their partner that whatever it is they're concerned about, it's not really worth it. They really don't have any ground to stand on. They're making mountains out of molehills. Once again, they're causing conflict out of nothing, or whatever that might be. So being able to catch these three different defensive maneuvers and how that can derail these conversations is really important. So if your partner comes to you and you feel yourself starting to get defensive, and we're going to talk about what to do here in just a moment, but these are three things that you don't want to do. You don't want to start explaining immediately. You don't want to turn it back on your partner and start attacking them and make it about you. And third, you don't want to minimize whatever it is they're concerned about, because this will start the conversation down rabbit holes almost every single time. And the reason is because all three of these defensive maneuvers basically communicate to your partner that you're not interested in hearing what they have to say. You're not interested in their feelings, that you can't sit with their feelings and try to understand it or be curious about them. And rather than you being a partner that can show up in a way that can actually be an available, soothing, comforting resource for them, that you're actually the opposite. You are a unhelpful resource for them being able to share their feelings. And so we want to take all those and we want to do the opposite almost. And we're going to get to that here in just a moment. But you can see how this plays out in conversations where one partner will come and bring up something to the other partner. It could be about anything. It could be about the kids, the dishes, finances, something that happened that hurt their feelings. It could be about their sex life. Whatever the topic is, in that moment, there's a crucial moment that happens, and the other partner can either start getting defensive and start using one of these three different maneuvers that can actually derail the conversation, or they can do something different that can really help their partner feel heard and understood. And so that's when we're going to get to next. So what is it that we want to be able to do? What do we do instead of getting defensive? We're going to use the R method, A-R-E method. And the first one of that is acknowledge. We want to be able to simply acknowledge what our partner's saying to us. This is the first step to doing something different than getting defensive. When we are able and capable of acknowledging our partner's concern, right away what we're doing is we are inviting them into a dialogue, and we are letting them know that we are capable of listening and probably to some degree capable of tolerating whatever feelings they bring to us. And this is huge. This is huge for creating a secure attachment. This is huge for being able to break cycles. Because when we communicate non-verbally to our partner that we can tolerate their feelings, then that makes them feel more safe so that they can open up to us. And they feel more safe in being able to open up to us in those kinds of conversations. So the first thing we're going to do is acknowledge. How do we do that? We just simply validate. We validate their experience. We might say, oh, I can see how you would feel that way. Oh, I can see how, even though I was joking, that could be hurtful, right? So we're just learning about what it was that upset them or hurt them or what they want to discuss in the first place and acknowledging their experience. Now, this is important because acknowledging their experience and their feelings doesn't necessarily we agree with everything they're saying. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we agree with all the content of what they're saying. For example, if they come to us and there's a decision that needs to be made about the kids, and there needs to be discussion about that. It doesn't necessarily mean that we agree with their solution in how to handle something with the children. What it means is that we can understand what they feel. Yeah, you're right. This is a tricky situation. We're going to have to talk about this. Yeah, you're right. That is difficult. I'm sorry you had that conversation with that teacher. That was really rough. Boy, that wasn't handled well by her at all. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Or, yeah, I'm sorry your boss, made you work late the other night, and I can certainly, empathize with that because I've been in that same situation. All we're doing is acknowledging the feelings behind their experience, what it is they're saying to us. And when we do that, again, we learn to be uncomfortable and to hold kind of like a container, if you will, whatever it is they're feeling. And we're communicating that, hey, your feelings aren't too much for me. I can handle those feelings. We communicate to our partner that we care, that we listen, and that we want to hear more. And then last, by acknowledging and validating their feelings, we're inviting them into that conversation. We're not shutting it down. Because those three defensive maneuvers that I talked about, those are ways of shutting the conversation down, not opening it up. So with the R method, the first one is acknowledge. We want to just acknowledge what they're talking about. We want to be able to sit with whatever it is they're feeling and validate their experience of that. The second part of this is reflect. Reflect. So we're going to reflect back what it is they're hearing. So we're going to want to mirror back what it is they're saying to us. And we don't have to use the exact same language. I felt hurt when you made that joke at my expense. I hear that you felt hurt when I made that joke at your expense. That's too mechanical. We don't want to do that. You can mirror back by adding some things to it. You can mirror something back by being able to say, oh, you felt hurt by that joke. I'm so sorry. That probably was insensitive of me. Or, oh, I could totally get how that would be hurtful. I can understand that. I was being playful. I was being, a little showy offish. You know how I get when we're around other people. That part of my personality just comes out. But no, I totally get that. That makes sense why you were hurt, right? You're just mirroring back that, oh, I can listen to your concern, I can sit with it, and I'm letting you know not only that I can understand how you feel, but that I'm getting clarity around what you're saying as well. And so being able to reflect back is just getting clear on what they're saying. Another way that you can do that is simply by saying, "Oh, you felt hurt by that? I didn't realize that. Tell me more about how that hurt your feeling. I'm confused. I want to know more." Right? So you can mirror or reflect back even by asking a question. Again, what you're doing is you're opening up a dialogue with them. You're inviting them into that conversation. You're not shutting it down like the defensive movers we talked about, but rather you're opening up that conversation by being curious and wanting to know more. And so being able to reflect back what they're saying is just clarifying their concern and letting them know that you are listening. And so the E is engage. So A is acknowledge, R is reflect, and E is we're going to stay engaged in the conversation. So we're going to stay curious. We're going to stay emotionally present. And so we want to be able to, again, continue that conversation and be a helpful, useful resource for them so that we create enough safety in that conversation that they feel like they can open up and express. Because if they're concerned that conversation's going to cause a cycle and your concern is going to cause a cycle, then the way you break out of that cycle is to use this R method. Acknowledge, reflect back, and engage in that conversation. And that is something you can do differently than being defensive, because when we stay engaged, we stay emotionally available to our partner. We stay emotionally responsive to our partner. We can separate the intent from the action. You know what? I'm so sorry. I can see where that would be hurtful. My intent was not to make a joke at your expense. But boy, I can sure see how it landed that way, or how it felt a little bit embarrassing in front of our friends. I'm sorry, I won't do that again. That certainly was the last thing that I would want to do, is to feel like I'm keeping you down or putting you down in front of people that we enjoy socializing with and our friends. So I'm sorry, that certainly wasn't my intent. I was probably just being flippant, and you know how I can be, but I can see how that is hurtful. So when you stay engaged, you can separate the behavior from the intent, and you can take some responsibility for your actions, and that's crucial as well. So staying engaged means that you can take some responsibility for what happened and for how it impacted them. I have two sons, and I remember when they were young, inevitably, they're 3 years apart. Inevitably, one son would always, engage in, there would be roughhousing or whatever, and the older boy would always somehow, hurt the younger kid. When they're 3 and 6 or 5 and 8, whatever, these things are going to happen. And so the younger son, of course, would always come crying to us, and my brother hurt me, and we would comfort and soothe him, and then we would go to the older boy and say, you hurt your brother, you need to apologize. The first thing he would always say is, "I didn't mean to." And we were like, of course you didn't mean to. We know what you guys do. Of course you did. You love your brother. You didn't mean to hurt your brother. But you still did, because you're bigger, and you need to learn to be a little more gentle because you're bigger than your brother is right now. And so having him learn how to separate the behavior from the intent was being able to stay engaged in that conversation enough with him that we could mirror back what he was feeling, we could validate what he was feeling, his intent, and we could stay engaged in that conversation enough to get him to be able to hear us, that we weren't blaming or criticizing him, but that he needed to be able to take responsibility for his actions, even though that was very different from the intent. And so doing something differently instead of getting defensive means that we can catch these cycles in real time. We can see how they play out. We can see what they look like. We know how we show up at times and contribute to the cycle. And it's really important for us to be able to know what our cycles look like and to be able to map those, because we have to be able to recognize those micro moments that when they start, when we get triggered, they might cause a real cycle. And so instead of doing those three defensive maneuvers, explaining, turning it back on our partner, or minimize, we want to be able to acknowledge, we want to be able to reflect back what they're saying and mirror what they're saying, and we want to be able to stay engaged so that we invite them into a conversation that actually doesn't cause a cycle.